Welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I'm delighted to welcome a musician, man who's left and is still leaving an indelible mark on the world of music. A musician has been part of our musical landscape for decades, with a career that spans from the British invasion of pop in the 60s to the progressive rock sound in the 70s and beyond. He's been instrumental in shaping and pushing the boundaries of rock music, fiercely adapting and evolving his sound, and the mastermind behind Manfred Mann and Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Welcome, Manfred Mann, to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast, and thank you for joining me today. And how are you?
Hello. Never ask anybody over the age of 60 how they are. They may tell you. All in all, I'm well.
That's good. I am in that age bracket as well. Your musical career has spanned decades, nearly 60 years, and lots of different genres. And you had 17 hit singles between 1964 and 69. But what really fascinates me is that pivotal point between 1969 in the world of rock music, 69 to 72. So many things were changing that you changed direction, first of all with Chapter 3 and then the Earth Band. What were you listening to back then that made you think we need to go in that direction?
Well, people kind of misunderstand who, not just me, but Mike Hugg and a lot of the, quite a few of the people I worked with, is that we, in 1969 or 1970, when we changed, we were just going back to where we started from. So we didn't start as pop musicians at all. So it wasn't we went back. We saw around us people kind of doing things which are edging on what we'd been doing anyway before we did do our Diddy. What had changed, oddly enough, was that starting out as a jazz musician, then being part of the pop world, by the end of the 60s, or well before the end of the 60s, I was a pop fan. So that although, in a sense, we started a blues band, well, how do we earn a living? How do we buy a loaf of bread? How do we live? And that's why Mike Hugg, we thought, well, this jazz thing's going nowhere. Let's become a blues band. And it was a kind of almost, it was a mercenary decision, at least on behalf of those of us in the group who were jazz musicians. But by the time you started listening and you're in pop music and you're doing it, well, you realize how difficult it is to do well. It's difficult in another way. It's not technically difficult in the same sense. Being a jazz musician is incredibly technical. Technical demands are insane. And to this day, when people say, "Oh, gee, you're a great keyboard player," I say, no, none of us are great keyboard players. The people I were listening to, better than anyone in pop music, and none of us are any good. It's not false modesty or anything, but pop music, the music of songs that people like and listen to, it just requires some other, much more indefinable kind of quality. So, but anyway, to answer the question, in 1967, we were sort of going back to where we were before we started, but with the influence of songs and singing, and whereas we didn't start that way.
Because your background, as you've just said, was in jazz, and you also had a really keen interest in classical music, that gave you obviously...
No, I never had a really keen interest in classical music.
Oh, but you've kind of, the motifs have emerged in your music over the years, haven't they?
That's a very shallow interest, Phil. That's not a deep interest. That's a shallow interest. How can I use a bit of a nice theme from a great composer and schmurgle it into a song and use it? No, it's a very shallow thing. I don't listen to much classical music.
Very interesting. But the jazz then gave you your improvisational chops and chance to stretch out.
Absolutely, yeah. And to this day.
Yeah. So who were you listening? Because you were a host on BBC Radio 3 in a show called Stereo Rock, and when you were introducing people to progressive music. So who were you listening to then? Were you listening to certain bands and thinking we want to be a bit like that? Or
I think the truth is that I never really listened to rock music. I didn't listen to other bands. There are people I admired, like people like, just say, Deep Purple.
Yeah.
But I never listened to a whole album. I wouldn't dream of it. I wouldn't have dreamt of it. Jethro Tull made some lovely records. Jethro Tull album, no. So the only albums of pop music I would have listened to would be the Beach Boys, maybe.
Wow.
Pet Sounds. So I would listen to these bands, but I'd listen to the hits and things, you know. So I wasn't really listening to anything different. I mean, but I started to really like certain kind of blues artists. I mean, as a modern artist, Keb Mo, and there were some of the blues guys I really liked to sort of, but then I'd sort of been listening to blues in the Ray Charles sense.
Yeah.
In the late 1950s in South Africa. So but I never really listened. I kind of liked pop music. I listened to the charts, you know, and I listened, you know, I wasn't listening to obscure, being influenced by this band or that, but one was aware at the time, for example, of Emerson, Lake and Palmer and things like that. You were aware of what people were doing, but to actually listen to a whole album, God, no, I just didn't. I don't listen to my own albums. You know? So I always, you know, I just listened to what came along and and discover this and discover that. You know?
So when you started kind of the mini moog, that became part of your sound, your kind of input, that sound. I mean, and then one of the albums I think I first heard it on was you played on July Morning by Uriah Heep from their Look at Yourself album. I think it was 1971. That was before you signed to Bronze. Were you aware of that band at the time, or was it just like a session?
Uriah Heep?
Yeah.
Well, we were managed by the way, I think that solo is one of the worst I've ever done. I was still learning it. And Jerry Braun, who was our manager of Uriah Heep, said, "Oh, that's great, man." I said, it's not. And I listened back to it years later. I still think it's not. I was just fiddling about. You know, I listen to it now and I hate it. So, but anyway, nevertheless, it's known because Uriah Heep. Well, I knew a bit about Uriah Heep because we toured America with them.
Yeah.
And we very often to this day come across them when we do gigs. So I knew about them. I didn't follow them as such. As I said, I'd hear the odd song here and there, think it was very good. But it wasn't generally, I didn't listen to Led Zeppelin. I didn't listen to Cream. I just heard a bit of a track here and a bit of a track there. I don't know what that says about me. You know, maybe that's terrible. I didn't listen to Genesis. But every time I hear Peter Gabriel, it sounds brilliant, but I've never heard an album.
I suppose there are some musicians that you're almost like sponges in some ways, and if you over listen to something, it almost probably overflows into your own creative source, I suppose. I
listened to Bruce Springsteen's whole albums.
Yes, it would. Yes, that's what.
Yeah, I've listened to the whole albums.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, that's okay because I've got that on my sheet of questions to ask. Because although let's stay with the prog bit, because it's what's interesting. You love songs, you love pop songs, you love melodies, but there was something about progressive rock and the chance to stretch out instrumentally and go outside of the kind of limitations of, say, blues rock in some way, which you did, because there's not much in some of your Solar Fire, for instance. It doesn't sound much blues rock. It sounds more of like a progressive rock album.
Yes.
So the prog aspect, there was something about that, although you weren't listening to whole Deep Purple albums or ELP, there was something about what was happening around you that sparked an interest.
Well, what it did was it sort of, I think you kind of realize, well, if I just do what I do naturally here, people will put it into a sort of category, which they've opened up with the public and stuff. But what I was doing was the same as what I was doing, you know, in the beginning. What had changed, and I almost wanted to do I look at YouTube a lot and, you know, try and learn from people. And it's quite interesting. Sometimes you see people teaching. They can't even play properly themselves. You watch their fingers going in the wrong way and doing it. But sometimes you can learn things. And they're all teaching people how to play jazz. And I realized I'm an improviser, but I'm not a jazz improviser now. So I play very diatonically, very much within the key, very much within the chords, with a touch of blues. So it's as if other people opened the doors for us to do. I mean, for me, for example, if you say, what's the most difficult thing to do? For me to go into my little studio, I'm living in Sweden now, and do something weird is the easiest, most natural thing in the world. You get some monks come in and they sing or they shout in terror. Then you put some weird chords underneath and maybe an alarm clock ticking and you play something. that to me is easy. What's really difficult is to do what Taylor Swift does. That is what is actually hard. Girls want to have fun, but I've forgotten her name. Cyndi Lauper. That's a great record. And that's the difficult thing I found to do. That's the hard thing. To do weird stuff. So people around us were doing weird stuff. Well, gee, I can out-weird anybody, if it comes to weird, I really can. And in early 1960s, I've written about this, but I don't think anyone's read it. When we were doing a little club in Southampton, I asked, talk about conceptual art, conceptual music, and people think, have you got good ideas and think in a new way? Man, I was thinking in a new way. It's so ridiculous, I should have been thrown in a river, And so I said, well, why do we play to musical time? Why don't we play to chronological time? It's a kind of mad thought process. At the time, we're doing things like, Gypsy Woman Told My Mother.
Yeah.
We did a gig in Southampton where we played to an alarm clock. So in the middle of a gig, when everyone's around, a table was brought out, alarm clock was put on the thing with a microphone, and the microphone was ticking, you see. You could hear the clock ticking. And while that clock was ticking, we were making, pre-Neanderthal human sound, little insects in the primeval sleaze of, the primeval ooze of pre-human with flutes and weird stuff. And then the alarm clock went and suddenly Krakatoa exploded and we were all playing this stuff. And then in the end, we stopped and the alarm stopped. That's the kind of bullshit, the weird, strange nonsense that I would have. So no one to me was weird. It was a question of being weird and good, which is what Frank Zappa could do. He was incredibly good, at that in its way. So, that was, but anybody else being weird was always easy for me. It was pop music that I found difficult. Try and write a song like some of the Beatles songs. You'd write the song. It's just ridiculous. Hey Jude, it's easy to have a load of monks screaming and bull sperm dripping from the ceiling, but try and write Hey Jude. So for me to answer your question, other people opened the door to public perception. For us, it wasn't that strange to do what we were doing or to go that way. It was almost natural for us.
Because obviously I understand it, because you can see now that obviously I'm thinking of it from the perspective of what kind of progressive rock bands you're influenced by and stuff. But obviously what comes through it all is your skill and incredible vision of arranging other people's songs. And you said earlier that the song itself, and you've mentioned Taylor Swift and etc. and Hey Jude, is that certain artists like Bruce Springsteen and especially Bob Dylan,
yes,
you've taken their music and completely, I don't know if say reinvented it, but reimagined the vision of what Bob couldn't have seen himself for some of those songs.
Yeah. In order to do that, it's essential to approach the original with a complete lack of respect. You're not trying to, the original record is there. You're not taking away the original record from the public. Take Blinded by the Light. If you like the Springsteen version, and elements of it I really love, by the way, you can go along and it's there, so I can do what I like. And the other thing is not to listen to the original after you've heard it at the beginning. So you don't actually get influenced by it. So you might go off into angles and things. I think, for example, on Blinded by the Light, wrapped up like a deuce is one of the phrases. It's never in the original record. It's cut loose like a deuce.
Yes,
I ended
right.
up with complete nonsense. Just by mistake. I got some of the chords wrong, which had turned out to be a good thing. But I would play at the piano endlessly to try and find a way to make it work just on my own, but not go back to the original. So that's kind of how I do it. Sometimes you have an instant vision. And when I heard Father of Day, where Dylan's going, Father of Black and Father of White, and I just said immediately you could do that really slowly. So sometimes I can almost hear the alternative record instantly. Sometimes, other times I can't, and you just fiddle around and eventually you land up, sometimes by mistake, in places you didn't intend to at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example, isn't it? Because that's what 1 minute, 30 seconds is the original by Mr. Dylan, and you took it to nearly 10 minutes in length, and it's so different. Were you not in some ways thinking I could just change the lyrics on this and it would be an original song almost? It was, that song is so different, but you still kept it as like a Dylan cover, but it's so
Why weren't you
different.
around then telling me that? I never thought of that. No, there's certain things that are said in music business, which are, first of all, just to digress, the music business is a very, very nice business. Everybody tells you how good you are. Everybody, you sort of generally, apart from a few critics, record companies are enthusiastic. People say nice things. They just don't pay you.
Yeah.
That's what the money never arrives. Everyone's got a deal. Everyone's doing it. The money doesn't arrive. But the other thing in the music business is you make more money by writing the song, or an extra amount, a fairly large amount. It doesn't just go for the record. It goes, you must write your own songs. And of course it does, but only if you're successful. So my whole career was based on not taking songwriting royalties. I just said, well, I got to sell 1 million records here. That's my real job. Then we'll do gigs and we'll be successful. Yes, I could make more, but I can't write songs as good as Dylan. So yes, you could have, but Father a Day, and actually since you picked that, would never be the same song if it was wasn't Father of Day. Mm-hmm. I suppose, just coincidentally, and I don't think Blinded by the Light, even if you managed to get away with it, I'm not clever enough to have done it. And also too much work and certain. So you've got something that really works. Why mess with it? What say you can make more money if it succeeds? It just didn't. But you are right. Certainly in the case of Father of Day, you could make the same record, and it wasn't a hit record anyway. It was an album track.
Yeah, it's an album track.
You could have done it. You could have done it. That's absolutely right. You could have done it. It's never occurred to me.
But because you covered such a lot of Dylan stuff, You Angel You, Shelter from the Storm, The Times That Were Changing for Man Alive, and obviously Get You Rocks Off and stuff. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. Mm-hmm. What is it about Dylan's songwriting that resonated so much with you?
Well, the first thing is he sort of does them so badly himself. And I don't mean that, please don't quote out of context.
No, I understand.
It does it great for Dylan, but it's not that obvious when you hear Bob Dylan. It's not screamingly obvious that this is a great, catchy song.
No, it's very true.
It kind of works because he's drawing it out, and you kind of got this great atmosphere that he creates, which I think is lovely, by the way. But they're actually, a lot of them are straight pop songs on 3 chords. What's interesting is how he manages to do it with so little harmonic structure and such simple. Come on with that, come on with it, you will not see. Da 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 da. It's just so simple. But to do that, that's what I'm saying. It's the simple stuff that's difficult. I'm not talking about his lyrics, which are very complex, but that is so simple that I just couldn't do that. I wouldn't know how to do it. I could do something weird, like I did with some of the chapter 3 things. You could do something weird. That's easy. But to do something that's simple, that's also catchy, it doesn't sound corny. That's the other thing. It doesn't sound corny, Dylan. Even when we do gigs, everyone sings Mighty Quinn. It just doesn't sound corny. And you hear other people do similar things. It's not difficult to write something sort of like that, but it's really difficult to write that indefinable quality where it's really pop music. It's really simple. It's harmonically in every way. There's nothing special about it, except there bloody is.
Yeah, you probably brought the genius of Bob Dylan to people's ears who probably thought he wasn't for them. And probably still do in many cases think he's not for them.
That may be true, yeah. That may be true.
Because you've shown a sense of melody and dynamics in the way you arranged his songs. You Angel You is a good example where people going back and think, oh, I need to listen to Bob Dylan now, will think, oh, yours it's a totally different, thing. And the other thing, I guess, that the other person that comes to light is obviously Bruce Springsteen, and the fact you picked 3 songs from his first album in 1973, Blinded by the Light, which you discussed, For You, and Spirits of the Night.
Yeah, and actually I'm doing another one, which I've been working on a really long time. I'm not going to tell you about it. But
that's okay.
Which is really good and very interesting. Very, very, very different.
But you can't tell me what it is, but is it from the first album or another one?
No, I'm not going to give you clues. Come on. And not that it matters, really. Not that it matters. But
anyway. Because obviously that first album must have really resonated with you. The fact you picked 3 songs from it to use in 3 separate occasions. What was it about him?
Yeah, but the reason for that is that it's on the first album that he's singing in a very idiosyncratic and very personal, non-pop way. So when he comes along to do the later albums, they're really, first of all, they're very successful. So everybody knows them. And he's already done the definitive version. Same with Elton John. You wouldn't do an Elton John song. He's done the definitive version. But Springsteen on the first album, it's all very raw. It's not the definitive version you feel. It's a guy doing a great song with the band, getting it all. And I saw Springsteen very early doing some of those in America. And very exciting and brilliant in its own way, but not obviously pop music. But when you get born in the USA, it's so obviously a rock pop hit type song. What can you do with that? There's nowhere to go. He's done it. But on the other ones, things like For You, they're beautifully done and everything, but they're very, very personal.
Yeah, because For You is a brilliant example. It kind of turns it into a on the line type Toto type AOR rock song from that period. Because Bruce Springsteen at that time he was so desperate to get all the words in that he'd written, he would speed up the delivery of one line just to get that extra few syllables in, which meant that covering his songs you must have had to really kind of dissect them and decide, as you said with Blinded by the Light, you change some bits, or is it because you only listened to it once and thought, I'm not going to get over influenced by this, I've got the gist of it, I'm now going to turn it into a Manfred Mann's Earth Band song?
Well, I just would learn it off so that I learnt it. And then I would just, as I said before, I just sit around and fiddle about. Could you change the chord? Could you do this? Does this sound better? How do you join that with that? And really, you could say one is taking a work of individual brilliance, in the case of Springsteen, and turning it into a more mainstream commercial thing. I mean, you're seeing me, which I like, by the way, through, this guy who goes and makes it his own and everything. I'm just trying to think, hey, here's a great song. How do I turn this into something successful? And everybody else has missed how good this is. I mean, I remember when Springsteen did, Bob Dylan did If You Gotta Go, Go Now on a BBC broadcast. And I watched it, and Tom McGuinness in the 60s group with me, he also had a good ear for song, Tom. And he played this song on BBC at a time when he was very successful and there weren't 100 TV channels and YouTube. A large part of the music business watched this. And then Tom phoned me up and said, what about that song he did? That's a great song. It was so clear to me, the song was so good that it's already been, everyone's seen it. People would have phoned up already the thing. And that somebody else would have wanted to do this. And we would be in a queue of people who want to do this great song that hadn't been recorded. No one had done it. So we did, and it landed up being number 2. It would have been a number 1 record had it not been for Ken Dodd and Granddad or whatever he did. People don't hear it. I mean, but it was so obvious to Tom and I, this is just a great song to record. And we did. It's a lovely song.
So when you do like an arrangement as big as like Blinded by the Light, or just focus on that for now, because the band, the performance and the vocals and everything about it is just fantastic. And and you listen to the song maybe once or twice just to get a feel, and then off you go. Did you have to kind of tell the rest of the band what it was? Did they go on and listen to the original? Especially I'm thinking of the vocalist.
No,
in case they were influenced at all.
I can't remember whether I many cases, I would kind of sing a rough demo and give it to Chris Thompson. Yeah. I think I would do that. I really can't quite remember that aspect of it.
Because he sings like, he's a fantastic vocalist, but he sings it like it's his own, like it's an original song, that it's only been sung ever by him, the way
he does. And, he does that particularly well. But I came across an old diary I had a list of tracks, and I made a note in New York once on tour, that these tracks were potential singles and these were album tracks. And I had some tracks which I thought could be singles for Earthband. At the bottom of the album track list was Blinded by the Light, at the bottom. So we didn't start off thinking, wow, this is going to be successful. What happened was that we had recorded a very, very complex version of that, an extremely complex version, which isn't even the album track. And in that version that we did, with its changes and cello players coming in and all sorts of things, the chorus was just great. And the outro was just great. And we had to kind of redo the record and get rid of sections in order to simplify it, even though it sounds maybe a complex record. That was the simplified version. It took 9 months to simplify the already recorded version.
Wow.
So, and even if you listen to the beginning, for example, the very opening, you think it goes ding, 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 ding. It doesn't. It starts on the second chord. And it starts on the second chord because we had to cut it out of something that went bap. We had to make that a beginning. It was never the beginning. It started with cellos playing ding, 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 ding. And then we had to do crossfades and everything. So it was an incredibly difficult record to simplify. Oddly enough, to simplify it was very, very difficult. I didn't have it all in my head, but when we recorded it, we realized some bits of it sounded really, really good, and we simply had to do it. But even when I'd arranged it, I didn't have the final record in my, properly. But I could recognize when something's really good.
Did you, because it was a massive hit. And I remember buying the album, The Roaring Silence, at the time, and all my friends did. We just presumed, obviously, it was a song by yourselves. Did you ever get feedback from Mr. Springsteen? Because it must have affected the way he ever played that song live.
I don't know. I mean, the rumors I had is that he just didn't like it because I got the lyrics wrong and it's wrapped up like a deuce. But it was very, very interesting. I mean, the story of Blinded by the Light, I did a whole lecture to it, to a sort of music thing here in Sweden one day, with playing how it happened and how it happened, or partly by accident. We had when the record, if you listen to the record now, it says wrapped up like a douche. Is it douche? Is it douche? You can't really tell.
No, it's very true. Yeah.
And I got a sort of call from Warner Brothers in America, and they said, look, the Bible Belt stations in the southern parts of the United States, I don't know why God seems to be mixed up with body parts, but anyway, they find it difficult because douche sounds a bit like vaginal douche. And although we're all made in God's image, for some reason or other, this is like hugely offensive. I can't think why. But anyway, and could you change it to deuce? Because we're not getting played on the southern Bible Belt stations. And it came out at douche. It's hard to explain this, but at the time you had tape. We obviously didn't have digital stuff. And the tape angle was the azimuth, it's called. But anyway, the angle of that tape was slightly out, fractionally out. And if you played it back on a normal machine when it came, then you to get it done sort of at the end, and that was dead straight. It messed up some of the S's in the thing. And so it became... So I said, well, all right, I don't mind. We'll try and do it. And we sort of went in and we angled and fiddled around technically, and we managed to get it to go deuce. But when it said deuce, all the hi-hats went wrong and the whole record sounded terrible, but the voice was right. It's a really strange technical error, this. So I went back and said, well, I can't do this. If they won't play it, they won't play it. So be it. But I'm not going to put out a record that sounds bad for part of the Southern Bible Belt Baptist, whatever church things. Well, the record goes and it eventually is number one in America. And we're touring America, and everybody says, and time and time again, people say, do you know why it's all the way to number one? I said, why? He said, well, everyone's talking about whether it's douche or deuce. So the same thing that was considered to make the record fail was eventually, once it succeeded, considered to be the reason it succeeded.
Fantastic.
It's so stupid.
You've always been at kind of the front end of things. And we now obviously live in a time when, we have lots of environmental issues with climate change and stuff. But rolling back to 1974, you almost were ahead of yourselves with the album that had an eco message, with The Good Earth, when you gave people a chance to buy a square foot of the Brecon Beacons. And I know that this was on Countryfile in 1995 after watching a documentary. Yeah. Has it become almost like a pilgrimage that people head off to see their square foot of land?
I really don't know. I think very occasionally somebody may go, but I don't think so. I think that just the BBC Countryfile thing, and I just forgot about it. I mean, it was my idea. I just thought people giving away a pair of socks or an extra free CD or this or that, why not give away a square foot of earth?
Yeah.
Well, you can't really give it away because that means you have to have a land registry document for each square foot.
That's
so
true.
What we did was we gave people the right to their foot, and you could walk over everybody else's. So it's kind of a legal document,
Yeah.
And it's still there, and it's kind of in the middle of forestry land, and it is a kind of wildlife haven in a way, still to this day.
Yeah, it's a great, and obviously that album came after Solar Fire, which sits as one of those beacons in your catalogue, as being seen as one of your finest moments, and lots of my subscribers and members love that album. An obvious question would be, did you think it would have this kind of influence all these years later? But no one can ever tell at the time. But what are your thoughts on it now? Do you see it as like a high watermark in what you were trying to do?
I think the problem with me is that I don't listen very much because I always think I'd mix it differently, or that isn't as good as it should be. And I'm so connected with it that I just don't listen because they just don't sound good to me,
But William, there's a great market for remixing at the moment.
Yeah, but we don't have the original files.
Oh, I see.
They all got burnt. They all got burnt in the studio file.
Oh dear, yeah.
And I was almost pleased when they got. I thought, at least I'm not going to have to bother with that shit, It's good. But I think there are really good bits and things there. I just don't know. When I listen to what I've done, I often listen to an individual track and I think, gee, that's good. But I don't like that. The only album I can listen to is an album I did in 1990, which is called Plains Music.
Yeah. Played that.
And that's the only album I can ever listen to and think, I've done something original. I've done something different that has a sound of it and that I can listen to. So I don't listen to any of the rock or pop albums. I'm sorry to say that. I'd like to be able to engage much more. Yes, I just don't listen to them.
Is that because it is so different, isn't it? And it was such a left turn, whichever way people thought you might go next. I mean, it's such an original album based on what's Native American Indians, isn't it? The whole kind of like looking at that, and it's such a different sound, and it's closer to Peter Gabriel in its execution than maybe what people might have expected from you.
Well, it was influenced by Jan Garbarek.
Yeah.
He's a Norwegian. Are you aware of him?
No, I'm not, no.
Okay, it's worth listening to. He's a Norwegian saxophone player. Has quite a big market, actually. And the idea is that my instruction to the musicians generally, or the African musicians, or they weren't all black African, but they were all African, different colors, was play as little as you can to get the message through. So the idea was not to try and play too much and to be very simple and not try and be technically brilliant or anything. And so that was the overall thing. Just we'll create an atmosphere and we just said it's good to listen to.
Was that a challenge as a jazz musician with obviously as you're such a great improviser to actually do less is more? I mean, I'm not suggesting that your music is full of stuff, but you know what I mean.
I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I wanted to do a music course which said, pop improvisation. You don't have to improvise. You don't have to play bloody jazz.
Mm.
The idea of improvising should be that you make up a tune.
Yeah, very true.
So it's your turn, and now you make up the tune. So to play Autumn Leaves and go da 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 da, and then the solo comes and you go ba-doop da-doop da-doop doop bop doop bop whap da da. What's that got to why not go da da da? Now early Miles Davis made tunes, and early Miles Davis was very diatonic and not quite so chromatic, and wasn't breaking new ground harmonically, and it was nice to listen to. And so I've always felt, and the people, and I'm very influenced by early Miles Davis. So when I play synth or on gigs and things, some of it is very, very simple with lots of space. If you listen to Davies on the Road Again, the album track, the beginning of the solo is very empty. A couple of notes here, a couple of notes there. So it comes from, I don't find it hard to play simple. I find it hard to play complicated, but sometimes. And as my technique, because I practice a lot now, has developed, and I'm playing technically much better, I'm sometimes thinking I'm not sure it's any better musically to listen to. It's just that I can get around the keyboard better now.
Yeah.
Because I put a lot of effort into it.
Do you think that in some ways, as rock music has developed, and especially the genre of progressive rock, the musicians, in a way, in some aspects, have kind of lost sight of the sense of melody and space and light and shade? I mean, I'm thinking of Mick Rogers as a fantastic guitarist and fitted in really well, and obviously has always been a part of you, even when he's popped off and done other things. But him and yourself, your sense of melody, even though it's a progressive rock band, as people might put you in that kind of label now, melody is king. The song is still kind of the key part. It's not. I
think that's true. True. That's true. But with, say, Father a Day, having a classical choir singing Father, I mean, it doesn't require much to think Father a Day sounds a bit like church music. Why not do that? And why not? So for us, it wasn't a difficult thing to do. The difficult thing is finding the people to do it and getting in the studio and actually pulling it off. Certainly melody for me and is really important. As I said, it's easy to be weird. For me, it's really easy. It's natural to be strange and do things. But I'm a pop fan. And many, many times when I sit here recording and I play a solo and I think, God, is all, that's great. I've played that really well, and then I listen back the next day and I throw half of it away because it's well played, but it's not nice to listen to. The idea is to listen back is supposed to be good, not just when you're doing it.
Because you've had, because I've been listening to obviously lots of albums in sequence, getting ready for this interview. And one of the things that becomes apparent when you listen to someone's catalogue in a short space of time, especially with your own, is your ability to adjust to what's going on around you in terms of musical styles and what you've kept up with. And you said you love pop music and stuff. So a lot of fans will keep going back to Springsteen and all the Dylan stuff. But as you went forward, you were listening to Sting, Bob Marley, The Jam, Eddie and the Hot Rods, all sorts of things were coming into your melting pot.
I wasn't.
Were you?
No, I just heard that song. Yeah.
So you had it literally on the radio on and thought that's a good one. I might do an arrangement.
Yeah, or I might listen to see what they've done and find an obscure song that's better. I'm not actually listening. And the thing to remember is that if we're talking about me, and I try to explain this to people, why am I better than average keyboard player, managed to succeed? The keyboard player is way better than me. You have not succeeded in this world. And there are people who do things better, haven't succeeded. I do not believe in positive thinking, and my whole career was based, and the whole success is based not on bullshitting yourself that you can do things that you can't do. And I think if you have to believe in positive thinking, then you're not positive, because you have to believe in this thing. And so right from the beginning, or very early on, I realized I wasn't a good pop writer. I can write some quite interesting, strange melodies, which I did with Chapter 3, but I'm just not good enough. I'm not a real artist, for heaven's sake. I'm a sort of, and I don't say this as a put down, I'm very quite arrogant about the fact that I've got the bloody brains to know that I wasn't a good pop writer. And we're not proper artists. So when you listen to it, you're hearing at each time a selection of different songs from different places that come in almost at random. We're not proper artists. We're phonies. That doesn't mean we're not good musicians. It doesn't mean that it takes a lot of ability and that it is one's life's work to do this every day, every single day to do it. But we're not proper artists.
So
we've managed to get ourselves, we've managed occasionally to nose ourselves in to where the big artists are.
So you obviously are a keyboard player, musician, and composer. Would you put the word arranger then closer to the top of who you are?
Oh, absolutely, at the top. That's all I am. Arranger, an arranger, and managing to sort of occasionally at the big table where the great artists are, there's great people in pop music. I mean, great artists. Occasionally you manage to sort of schmurgle, it's my word, schmurgle, get one song in here and one song in there and one song in there. And it's that ability, and it doesn't come from positive thinking or thinking one's great or one's making a contribution. Just the keyboard player managing to get by. The fact that at the end of all these years, one is actually solvent, and owns the place you live in is like a miracle.
Is arranging songs and the way that you do it and the way that you make them your own, is that something you obviously still to this day you must really enjoy, is creating like something new from a palette that exists already?
Well, you need to understand something. People ask me, it must be wonderful to do something you love. And I realized, well, actually, most of the time it's just a big pressure and you can't do it well enough and you're unhappy with it. And most of the time you bloody hate what you're doing. Or that you're certainly not getting pleasure from it. Occasionally you think, yes, that actually works. That's good. That works. And it's nice when you do that. But a lot of the time, and I think many musicians say, well, we're just doing a job. What it is, it's like breathing. Nobody goes around every day and saying, geez, I can breathe. Isn't it great, I can breathe. Try stop breathing.
Yeah, it don't last long. Yeah.
And it doesn't last long. And then when you take the next breath, you realize. So I think doing music's like that. Without it, I'd probably I'd fall apart. But I'm not enjoying it a lot of the time. I'm just trying and sometimes thinking, well, that's good enough. Most of it isn't. I should have done, So I don't know whether I enjoy it every day in that kind of joyous way. Absolutely not.
What do you think is the key to a successful cover song then do you think it is making it, because some people will do a song and it's almost like a carbon copy, a facsimile of the original, just with a different vocalist?
Well, when you say successful, do you mean creatively or commercially?
I'm going to say both, because obviously they're two different definitions, but a successful one to you, or do you think I've done a good job with that one? That's my fact. In fact, do you have a favorite arrangement of someone else's song that you think that's, if I had to pick one, that would be it? Or is that?
Well, I think probably the best arrangement actually probably is Blinded by the Light, because it does a number of things that accident. I mean, if I was at a keyboard, I could show you that Springsteen had different chords for the verse to the chorus. Madman, drummers, bummers, in this. I could almost show you the keyboard, and then he did the chorus beautifully. I kind of got it wrong and did the same chords for the verse and the chorus. It's just 4 descending chords. And it worked for the verse and it worked for the chorus. But if you just went from the verse to the chorus, Madman drummers, you went then into Blinded, it was just boring because it was the same thing. So you had to have something in the middle so that you stopped for a bit and then went to Blinded by the Light. So I've got these chords going and it's boring. And I think, well, I've got to do something. So I go to another chord in the middle. And then I thought, well, it's got to reach a climax or something, because the chorus is quite nice when it's empty. I was imitating Supertramp on Dreamer, just doing that ding, 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 ding. So really, that's a steal. I'm stealing all the time. That's a steal from that. And so then I thought, oh, well, I'll put this do-do-do-do-do and do-do-do in the middle. I said, that just cannot work in a pop record. It cannot. It's not going to be a pop record anyway. So I did it, do-do-do-do-do and do-do. And then it's got to reach a climax. So the idea of a climax, you make the biggest noise you can. Yeah. And then you go to the chorus. Now, the chorus has got the same chords. That's not what Springsteen did. He had different chords, verse, chorus, but it works. Obviously, it works. You hear the record, it works. But paradoxically, what that did, because it's the same chords for the verse and chorus, at the end, you could sing the verse over the chorus. Blinded, madman, that's all going at the same time. Now, because of that mistake, it was possible for me to think, well, you could do. But I mean, we did that on So You, semi-detached suburban mister. If you listen to the last few bars of that, you've got verse and chorus coming together. It's always a very good thing to do, to try and if you can put one on top. And I couldn't have done it if I hadn't made a mistake. But I think Blinded by Light probably, is the best off the wall, totally different kind of arrangement. But they are all very different. And I know Bob Dylan really liked them, at least one of the comments he made very early 60s.
Brilliant. Yeah. And now you said at the start of the interview that you only dipped in and out of classical music because it's not something you really listen to. But obviously with, the planets, you did dip in and out of that. And obviously with Joybringer, you managed to get the permission from the Holst family. But you also revisited that for the Mask album where you expanded upon it. Was that I think that's where I picked up that there was more of a classical influence, and plus you're a keyboard player, and I was thinking of obviously John Lord, Keith Emerson and stuff, but it was just something you put motifs into as a bit of musical mischief too.
No, I think that's absolutely correct. In the case of Planet Sweet and Holst, I listened intensely to that album.
Yeah.
To see which could we do, which would be interesting, and so on. I still like Mars the way I listened to it. I think I mixed it terribly badly. But I think Mars, the Bringer of War, is really good, what I did. And no, that was a challenge, and it was interesting. No, and in that case, I did listen. So there's sometimes I did a thing, Starbird, I think, that came from, I can't remember, Russian composer in the early part of the 20th century who did Firebird.
Stravinsky, yeah.
Stravinsky, yeah. And that came from that. So, no, I would listen, but I would listen just to steal the odd theme, figure out how to do it. There's very little that I listen to. I listen to a few pieces. I do listen to a few pieces of classical music, but very, very few.
Has it ever influenced your arranging, how you arrange songs, or the way that from listening to classical music, or?
I don't think so, but you never know what goes in. The biggest clear influences as a player, I was influenced by early Miles Davis, not the later Miles Davis. That's very clear. And I like John Lewis and the Modern Jazz Quartet, played very simply. And it's easier to like those guys because you couldn't play like Oscar Peterson or Errol Garner anyway. So it's not a good idea to even try. So those are the clear influences. Otherwise, you're just influenced by songs and good writing and good playing,
I mean, given the evolution of your music over the years, is there a particular album or song you feel represents your body of work better than the others? Or it probably might be 2 or 3 records. No.
Well, it's very difficult. It's sort of the only thing that represents me in any way on all the albums is my own personal playing. I think, and even now I'm doing some tracks and I'm starting to do some instrumental tracks the last 2 weeks or so. That reflects me. And I'm in my 80s now, and I'm conscious of that at some point, I probably won't be here in 10 years' time, maybe not 5. I'd like to leave behind some of my own playing. And so I'll often listen to, you might listen to Redemption Song, which is a long, long thing. There's an African choir singing a bit, Trevor's playing. And I listen to my keyboard solo there, and I think, gee, that's not bad. That's good. And that is me. And nobody sounds like me.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So if it comes to a synthesizer, generally there are all sorts of trademarks which are just very natural for me, like bending notes down. That's what Miles did. He always felt he was playing going slightly off them. A lot of people go, they go up. And I tend to drag notes down at the end. It's just natural. I didn't work it out.
Yeah, that is a very, very good album. I was playing that yesterday. Yeah. Is that one of your favorites? Because it was quite a serious, obviously was a serious message. You were at the time.
Well, I really don't like musicians preaching to people and people who just want to listen to a piece of music.
Yeah.
I felt with somewhere in Africa, I was African and I had permission to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And also there are very few issues in this world, political issues. There are very few that are as clear in black and white terms, literally, of course, than South Africa and racism. I don't use the word apartheid. The racism was there long before apartheid was introduced. There were laws restricting Africans from doing it. This idea that apartheid was the big evil is just, it's already, racism was part of South Africa. And all through the album, I kept saying to the guys, does this work musically? I don't care about politics. I've got to make sure this isn't just, I'm preaching.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. When I listen to it, I mean, for example, when I listen to a couple of them, I think I'm mixed. The trouble is I listen to Redemption Song and I think the African choir is too loud. I'm so impressed with the sound of the African guys, I made them too loud. And they keep coming, saying, won't you help to sing, KwaZulu? This song's of freedom. No, Botswana. I'm thinking, oh, God, it's too loud. I can't listen to stuff. I think, I want to go back and pull the faders down. So perhaps it is. I think there's some very nice things. I think Africa Suite's good. And there's a line there that said, it's not for brothers and sisters of Africa. It's the only line. It's like a personal line in anything I ever wrote. It's not for me to say to you what you must do. And it was that feeling that I'm going to walk into the room with a bunch of African guys and get them to sing a song about their lives. And I'm a white guy living in England telling you what to sing. So it's not for me to tell you what to do. But of course it was, because I said, you've got to sing this and you've got to sing that. It was important for me to do it. But I don't listen to it. Like I listen to very occasionally, I have, and I thought, well, Africa Suite, that's not bad actually.
Yeah, it's a very good album. Now you're very much a live act, and you still are. I think you've just come back from doing some gigs, and I understand that this year we'll see you play your 2000th Manfred Mann Earth Band gig. In fact, I think it's your 2,800th gig, including Manfred Mann. Do you know where that gig's going to be when you reach number 2,000?
No, ask Helen. She knows. I don't even know. I'm not sure, because we're just doing another gig. I mean, to me, it's another gig.
Yeah.
From a marketing perspective, it's the 2,000th gig.
Yeah, but to you, it'll be like,
well, there's an audience there.
Tomorrow.
There, and you better be good, and you hope people record it well.
Well, yeah.
And because we're improvising, some nights aren't that good.
But that's the exciting thing, and that's what's exciting about going to see live music, isn't it? Or there's no, for me personally, if you buy a live album and it's just like the studio versions with the crowd at the beginning and the end, it's like. But that's the good thing about improvisational jazz, prog.
Well, I kind of agree and disagree with you here.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's only live if you're in the room. It's not live when you're listening to it at home. You can play it quietly and talk over it, make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
If so, I'm perfectly happy with a live album to put organs on top, redo vocals and tuning. The moment it's on TV, the moment it's filmed, it's not live.
Yeah. I can see that.
And that's just my view. And therefore, every trick in the book is worth it if you're going to go on TV. I saw a thing with The Who where they were playing to backing tracks and they sounded great. But a lot of live performance, I mean, what we do in live performance, I don't know how we do it, but we create an atmosphere that even if you're not playing good, it just builds and something comes through the gig that eventually just builds, because the arrangements are very, we're not the best musicians in the world, but we add up to much more than we do as individuals. I mean, I
totally understand what you mean, but obviously live as
Sorry, let me finish. But often when you listen to tapes of what we've done, I don't play that good. You listen afterwards to the recording, you think, oh, my God.
Yeah.
But in the gig, when you're standing there, it's different. There's sometimes I always worry about live recording because I think when you actually listen, well, it's not as good as it should be.
But it's authentic and real.
Something in the gig. Sorry, go on, carry on.
No, but it's authentic and real, because I know what you mean, because as a musician, you are feeding off the energy coming back from the crowd, which makes it a unique moment in time for that gig, which can't be duplicated on a piece of vinyl or CD.
It's not duplicated if you're not standing there.
No.
Listen, no, I'm very worried about the feedback from the crowd. At one time, I was using a guitar thing, and I was out front. And the problem was I wasn't playing as well because I was very conscious of the bloody crowd. And, you know, and if, you know, you must understand something. And this is me, and I think it applies to, I'm not used to being out front. So you can have 60 years of experience in the music business. You could be respected. I'm not saying I am, but you could be respected and blah, 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 and considered to be a genius. And somebody who's not that interested in music, who's stupid, and just come along with a friend because the friend's a fan, and they're standing in the front row, and they just yawn and look at their watch, and your whole 60 years means nothing because this person can totally destroy you just by yawning. So I don't like to see people, because if you see somebody looking bored, I can't play. I'm conscious of them. So I've gone back behind the keyboard now. It's not as good for the show because I really like being out front, but I wasn't playing good because I thought, oh, you know, these people are bored now. I'm trying to impress people. At the back where I'm totally on my own without the crowd energy, you might say, for me, I played better. But somehow or other on a live gig, we do create an energy, and a very violent energy at times, that isn't mature musicians. That's what we're good at. We're not mature old guys doing it right because we know how to do it, because we're, I mean, to me, professional is an insult. If you've got to say you're professional, then you've lost some energy. So with us, both Mick and I, sometimes we're playing stuff that if you listen to it, it's just not that good. But I'm hammering the keyboard, you know. In fact, I had an emergency watch, and sometimes I've taken it off now, gigs, and sometimes the watch would go because it assumed that I'd fallen and was going to call emergency services. Yeah. I was hitting the keyboard so hard. Well, when you're going whack, that's not how you play. You should play with relaxed hands and play good music. But sometimes at the end of these things, I'm going, ka, 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 ka. You know, and it's childish, but it's got the energy of an 18-year-old. And that's what we can do live. Sometimes it's not good, but it works when you're there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And 50% of nearly all your gigs have been in Germany. Yeah. So what is it about Germany that obviously just took you and the band to heart? Well,
I don't think they took us to heart more than, say, the Norwegians. It's just a bigger country. There's lots of gigs to play there. But I don't know. But I think, Germans sort of, I think maybe they're very serious. And you look at the Solar Fire album, and you look at some of the way Watch with the guy flying off in the air, and
yeah, it's a great album.
It all looks a bit weird and everything. We don't want people to find out that we're ordinary, funny people and anti-intellectual in some ways. They're seeking meaning, and I think we managed to fool them that the meaning is in the album cover, Solar Fire. I mean, for God's sake, look at it. It looks meaningful. It looks meaningful, connected to the universe.
It does. But you were saying about seeing someone yawn in the audience. I think people sometimes don't appreciate that musicians and creative people are also very sensitive souls as well. We're very.
Well, listen. Someone comes to a gig, they don't want to be there. They come in with their friend because their friend wants to go. They're allowed to yawn. They paid their money. They're allowed to look bored, and you can't keep everyone entertained. I'm not having a go at the guy. I feel it's us who's failing. But if I can't see that, I play better.
Yeah, well, I think anyone would. Yeah,
and also too much enthusiasm. You're trying to play good music, and there's all this going on. You think, well, actually, I'm not sure I want. Yeah, I'm not sure I want that.
Yeah, that's very true. So coming to the end now, there's been several box sets released in the last few years from Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Have you, as the band or yourself, been involved in, this one in particular, the 40th anniversary?
I'll tell you something. I have a business partner, Steve Fernie, and he deals with that. Yeah, he deals with it and puts it together and stuff. And poor guy, I haven't given him enough new stuff. I try and pay as little attention as possible to anything to do with my history. The history is too long. It's too complex. It's all, if you were bothered about it all the time, you couldn't move forward. And I try and move forward. I haven't released much, but there's a lot of music sitting around in my computer, and I'm slowly coming to an end to release some new stuff. I can't be bothered with old stuff and how it's packaged and how it's done. To be honest, I do know what's going out, and I do. Sometimes things come past me. If there's something coming out with some live tracks that haven't been released before, and I was given the opportunity to listen, some of them I said, no, I won't do that, but that's okay. So I will approve or disapprove things, but I just can't. There's just too much history.
Yeah, I understand. Well, that leads me to my final question, which is the most requested question from everywhere. I said, have you got any questions for Manfred Mann? And it was, when can we expect a new album from Manfred Mann? It's been a while.
Well, I'm in Sweden. It's quite difficult to work with my colleagues. I work with the Swedish guy virtually. Sometimes he's not available. I've got a whole load of tracks very nearly finished.
Ooh.
And I think my partner wants me to finish it properly. I could release the odd thing now. I wanted to say, why don't we put this track out with that? So this is one new track. But there's quite a lot of music in a computer, sitting around, half finished, half done. But I'm traveling between here, London, and Gothenburg, and I'm in Helsingborg. So it's actually quite difficult,
But it's not. It's on the horizon. It might be a distant horizon, but there is something inbound.
There's definitely, there's definitely, there's a whole bunch of music, yeah. And there's some tracks, particularly the Springsteen song from some years ago, which I've been working on for quite a long time. And
which you can't talk about, yeah.
Well, I've done 2 complete versions, which I've thrown out. The only thing I trust about myself as a musician in recording is there's 2 things I'm good at. I'm good at arranging for live performance, and I've got a good instinct for how things can be in a gig. That I have a natural instinct for.
Yeah.
And when recording, well, I obviously got a good ear for a song. And when recording, the only thing I really trust is when I say something's not good enough. And sometimes that may get out of hand. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. But I've been working on this thing for quite a while and gone through 2 things which are not good enough. When you listen back to them, they weren't good enough. They are much better now. So yeah. I do trust that. I do trust when a thing's not good enough. And sometimes you have a really good song and a really great hook line. So I have been working on this for a while, but I got so tired of it, I've actually stopped for a bit.
Okay, so finally, where's the best place for people to stay in touch with you, or where they can find out the latest news on yourself or the band?
Ask Alan. I'm not sure. There's a Manfred. I just don't know. I personally should be involved in some social media thing, but I think I'll just have no time to do anything else.
No, that's okay. Everybody watching this, the links to Manfred Mann and all the latest news will be in the description and will appear on the screen at this point.
Okay,
so everyone will be able to find
I
you.
think the website and the web, but I don't look at the website much, so I don't know. We're really bad at that. I should be much better at that.
Well, the music continues to resonate with fans around the world, including myself. It's a fantastic body of work, and it's so varied. There's so many different sounds and textures and light and shade. It's just wonderful to dip in and out of, no matter what era it is.
Oh, good. Well, nice to hear.
No, it is. And I know you're quite, the way you look back at your own catalogue, I understand that because you're so close to it. But from my perspective,
I think that's what it is.
You're just so close. But it's just resonates and it's timeless and it's just perfect for how you feel. How you feel emotionally. You can pick an album and it'll lift you up and take you somewhere else. It's fantastic stuff.
You're good. Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Manfred, for all your time this morning. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And I wish you lots of luck, and hopefully I look forward to finding out what Bruce Springsteen song it is that you've covered.
Yeah.
After all this time. All right.
Okay, well, nice to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks very much, and take care. And all of you watching this, remember to subscribe to Now Spinning magazine at nowspinning.co.uk, and I shall see you all very soon on the next episode. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to my special guest, Manfred Mann. Wasn't that absolutely fantastic? Wonderful insight into the man and the band's career. And I know I'll be playing lots of albums over the next coming days as well. And great to hear there's going to be some new music that's hopefully not too far out there on the distant horizon. So thank you very much indeed. And remember to check out Manfred Mann's website for all the latest news and also, all the albums that are still available. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for subscribing. And remember to subscribe to the podcast. Visit the Now Spinning magazine website at nowspinning.co.uk. There's a private Facebook group for collectors and music fans everywhere. Well, we're also on Twitter and Instagram and Threads, and of course the YouTube channel, where you'll see lots of unboxing videos and album reviews and even more podcasts as well. And you can also become a member as a patron or subscriber and get to see exclusive content that's not available anywhere else. So remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Take care, everybody, and I shall see you all very, very soon.